Well, welcome to Rugby Borough Council's Planning Committee meeting this Wednesday, the 12th of October. I'm Councillor Tony Gillis, the Chairman of the committee. The meeting is being web streamed to the public through the Council's YouTube channel. During the meeting, when asked to speak, please use the push to talk button on the microphone in front of you. This will allow the camera to pan in your general direction and everyone to hear you. Before we begin the formal agenda, I'm obliged to read out the following fire notice. There is no fire drill scheduled in the building this evening. If the fire alarm sounds, then please could I ask you to make your way out of the building, down the main staircase and out of the main doors of the town hall and congregate at the entrance to Caldecott Park. An officer of the council will give instructions on when it is safe to return to the building. Moving on to the agenda, the first item of business is to approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 17th of August 2022. All those in favour, please show. Okay, and they are approved. Second item is to receive apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies?
3 apologies for tonight's meeting from Councillors Mrs Brown, Eccleston and Srivastava. Councillor Mrs Garcia and Mistry are substituting for Councillor Eccleston and Srivastava respectively.
Thank you. Declaration of interest. To receive declarations of interest as defined by the Council's Code of Conduct for members. The first is non-pecuniary interests, and I'll start by declaring I'm a ward councillor in Binley Woods. This is the first item for application for the consideration. Councillor Mistry.
Chair, on the delegated power item on last page, I was just a recent employee of GE Alstom Power. So there is a demolition, so I don't know how it works, but I just want to have it recorded. Yeah. Okay, page 20.
Through you, Chair, that is a report to notes. That's okay, because there's no decision to be made.
Councillor Garcia.
I'd also like to declare I'm a ward councillor for Binley Woods.
Yeah, part 4, item 2, ward councillor for Wolverine Chiltern.
Right, any more non-pecuniary? No, okay. Pecuniary interests. No, and Section 106 Local Government Finance Act 1992, non-payment of community charge or council tax. And we're all innocent by the looks of things. Excellent. Before we continue on to items for consideration, I just need to read out the rules and regulations as for, because we've got a public speaker tonight, so welcome. The planning officer will speak first and present the application. The representatives for the objectors, the applicants and then the ward council will each be invited to speak. After each speaker, committee members will be asked if they have any points of clarification for the speaker. Any ward member or councillor who speaks on an application as part of the public speaking process will leave the meeting once all speakers have completed their presentations relating to it. Members of the committee will then go into debate on the application, asking relevant questions of the planning officer if necessary. A formal recommendation will then be made and voted on. Rules for public speaking. Speakers will have 3 minutes to make their presentation. They'll be warned by a short alarm when they have 30 seconds left, so please don't panic. And then a further alarm will sound when their time has expired. Their presentation should be brought to a halt. No extra time will be allowed, unfortunately. All speakers should direct their presentations to amplifying the planning matters they have previously put to us for the benefit of the planning committee. Speakers should restrict their comments to material considerations only. Any non-planning issues will be disregarded. Speakers should not introduce any additional information that has not been previously brought to the planning authority's attention, i.e. introduce late items that have not been suitably considered by the officers and properly addressed in the officer's report to planning committee for members to deliberation. No visual aids or handouts may be used and no questions to officers or members will be allowed. No members of the public are allowed to take part in the debate once their presentation has been given. So there's all the rules. We'll now move on for items of consideration. and determination, and the first one is with Sam, and this is 183 Rugby Road, Binley Woods.
Good afternoon. This presentation is for application R220299 at 183 Rugby Road, Binley Woods, which seeks permission for the change of use of an existing outbuilding to one self-contained holiday let for 2 people and associated access. The application is being reported to Planning Committee in accordance with paragraph 5.2.3a at the request of a councillor. The reason for the application being called in is due to a contrary opinion to the officer's recommendation in relation to policy SDC1 and section 12 of the MPPF in regard to the officer's assessment on impacts on residential amenities. The above site images show the semi-detached dwelling of number 183 on the left-hand side. To note, the applicant has carried out works to the driveway during the application process under permitted development. The right image shows the side extension, which gives access to the rear of the dwelling and where the change of use to the outbuilding would occur. The above site image shows the rear of the application dwelling and the size of the rear amenity space for number 183, including the proximity to the neighbouring gardens on either side. Here are the images of the existing outbuilding, which uses grey timber cladding and grey windows and doors. To the left-hand side of the outbuilding on this left-hand image, you can see the associated decking and the boundary fencing, which would be included in the holiday let as part of this change of use. The plans submitted for the proposal would alter the front of the house to create 1 independent parking space for the holiday let and 2 parking spaces for the occupiers of the dwelling. Some works to the driveway have already been completed under permitted development. This will be referred to again under the highways assessment later on in the application, in this presentation. The single-storey side extension, which can be seen next to the dwelling here and on the floor plans here, would be used as a shared space, would give access to the rear of the garden without requiring use of the main dwelling, and it would then lead down this path to the outbuilding, which is already existing as shown on the previous site photos. The applicant also provided a 3D model which shows the relationship between the dwelling and the outbuilding to the rear, which again is already existing. Just to note, the roof profiles have been omitted from the submission of this 3D drawing. And again, to reiterate, that the outbuilding is already existing and it does not change in size or scale and would only change use as part of this proposal. Here's an aerial satellite image and a site plan to show the context of the site within the setting of its surrounding dwellings. An assessment will later be referred to in regards to the relationship between the dwellings and the outbuilding and the proximity of the outbuilding, which can be seen in grey at the rear of the site, and its direct relation to these rear amenity spaces of the neighbouring properties and also distance to the actual dwellings. And just to further note, this piece of land behind the rear amenity spaces is greenbelt land. In terms of the consultation process, there was an objection received from the Parish Council on the grounds of a detrimental precedent, impact on residential amenity, as well as access and highways issues. The key considerations are the principle of development, where the application is located in Binley Woods, which is considered a main rural settlement, and therefore development is permitted within existing boundaries of all main rural settlements and unallocated sites. Policy ED4 of the local plan states that the following forms of development and uses are acceptable in principle, both inside and outside the urban area, subject to the content of other policies in the local plan. These uses are small-scale tourism, visitor accommodation, and particularly those which would help to provide local employment and support rural services. The holiday let can be considered small-scale tourism. There was a supporting statement submitted with this application which provided a clear rationale behind wanting to convert the existing outbuilding due to a change in personal circumstances by the applicant. This justification, however, does not provide any further supporting information in relation to a need for such a development in the specific area or market evidence within Binley Woods indicating a further need. Therefore, on balance, the principle for the development can be accepted under policy ED4 and GP2, as long as all other planning matters are addressed. In terms of character and design, policy ED4, which establishes the principle, does go on to state that it is stressed that all schemes will be assessed against the impact that is likely to be caused to the character of the local area. In assessment to this, the residential dwelling has no heritage designations, and therefore the internal works do not require permission and do not require assessment. The existing outbuilding and associated amenity space are considered of an acceptable design in terms of scale and material. It is also accepted that the outbuilding itself is in character and commonplace at the proximity at the foot of residential gardens. However, the change of use and introduction of a holiday let in a residential garden is considered out of character with the surrounding area, with no similar examples reflected elsewhere in the locality or any other examples of an intensification of a rear amenity space in a similar manner within proximity. Another assessment is the impact on residential amenity. Section 12 of the NPPF states that planning should always seek a high standard of amenity for existing and future users of development. Again, the outbuilding exists under permitted development, and the use of this space does already exist, which is currently limited to the occupier of 183 and their guests. However, this change of use proposed to a holiday let would create an intensification of the site. The associated noise and disturbance as part of the intensification and use of the site by holiday makers would be considered to have a significantly detrimental impact on the existing and the future users of number 181 and number 185. If members were minded to go against the recommendation and consider the introduction of a holiday let in a residential garden and the impact on neighbours acceptable, a condition would be required to keep the holiday let ancillary and associated to the dwelling. If the holiday let were ever to operate separate to the occupier of number 183, this significantly detrimental impact would also be extended to the occupier of number 183. No technical consultee took an eventual stance of objection subject to conditions or informatives. Again, if members were minded to approve the application, Highways would require a condition to be put in place on any approval decision notice, requiring the site to be brought into appropriate parking standards before the development is occupied. Just to note, this would need to be adhered to and agreed with the leading highway authority, regardless of any works already completed under permitted development. In conclusion, the proposal is considered suitable in principle, and all valid objections raised by respondents have been assessed and considered in the decision. No technical consultees take a final stance of objection to the proposal, subject to conditions and informatives which would need to be applied to the decision notice in the event of an approval. The design of the outbuilding as existing is also considered to be acceptable. However, the change of use would create a development which is considered out of character and not reflected elsewhere in the locality, a point which was also raised in the Parish Council's objection. There would also be potential for a significantly detrimental impact to the neighbouring residential amenity and future users of number 181 and number 185. It is accepted that the current neighbours did not submit an objection to the proposal. However, as previously stated, as part of Section 12 of the NPPF and Policy SDC1 of the local plan, future occupiers must be considered. Therefore, due to the intensification of a site which is in proximity to the neighbouring dwellings, this application is considered to be significantly detrimental through the intensification of a use in a residential garden space by means of associated disturbance and noise. Due to the reasons above, the application is considered to be contrary to Policy SDC1 of the local plan and in turn Section 12 of the NPPF. It is therefore of my recommendation that this application should be refused. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks for the officer for that presentation. Before we move on to the speaker, have members got any questions to the officer? Only questions. Councillor Sanderson.
Yeah, having had a look at the application, I note there's been no objections from technical consultees, and you said, or said on 4 separate occasions as you were going through this, that the development could be permitted. Is it because it's a holiday let that you have a problem? If it was a granny flat or a games room, and if you go back to the site drawing, it showed, so in some of the back gardens, larger buildings. Could you go back to the site, right? The street plan. That one. Yeah, you would note that there are other buildings on that boundary line much larger than the one that is proposed. So my concern is why is this one a particular problem as opposed to those which are actually much larger outbuildings and backland developments than this one?
So that was in reference to permitted development rights, which you do have, which are often attached to dwellings, which allow you to build outbuildings in the rear of your garden. So this existing outbuilding and those other outbuildings may have been under permitted development, which do not require permission. There is conditions within when you build an outbuilding that it remains what is said to be incidental, which would be sort of secondary to the dwelling. In this case, this is for a change of use to not be an outbuilding which is incidental and which is instead a holiday let, which would be sat at the rear of the garden. So that's why that's the reason for the application, and that's the reason why it's found to be out of character, and again the impact on residential.
So it is clearly about being a holiday net, not any other type of use.
Yes.
Thank you.
A question from Councillor Willis.
Thank you, Chair. On reflection, I do have a question with regard to holiday let, but just having considered the point that the officer has made, I will actually defer that, if I may, until after we've heard from the Speaker. Apologies, Chair.
Yeah, thanks for that. Right, we'll move on to the Speaker. And Miss Anne-Marie Brownlee.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak at this committee. I want to start by giving you some personal background as to my application. The building in my application was actually my partner's photographic studio. He suddenly died very unexpectedly less than a year ago on our daughter's 2nd birthday. As you can imagine, things have been tough, but I'd hope you understand that my application is based on a need to generate additional income to secure mine and my daughter's longer-term future. As it's quite a large building with existing electricity and water, I thought converting it into accommodation for short-stay visitors to Rugby and the surrounding areas, like an Airbnb, would give me some extra income. It's intended for short-term visitors only. I have a small child to look after, so long-term lets are not what I'm after. If it's short-term, I think the noise and disturbance would be a lot less if it was, say, use of a hobby such as playing musical instruments or woodworking. It is primarily only to be used for sleeping accommodation. The building is over 20 metres away from the rear of adjoining houses, a distance that most new houses are apart. There are no houses backing onto my house, and the building and decking are already in existence and used by friends and family now. And I can't see why this would harm the character of the local area, as I do not envisage it being used intensively. I'm confident that my proposal will not cause any problems to my neighbours, and it is significant that none of my neighbours have objected and personally have spoken to me in support of my application. Also, the Environmental Health Department have not raised any objection on noise grounds. If, as a committee, you still feel the use could result in planning problems, could you consider a temporary planning permission to test how the use affects adjoining neighbours and the impact on the area? I would be happy for conditions to control the use, such as permission being personal to my occupation of the main house, stays no longer than 2 weeks with only one car visiting with the associated use, and no activities or noise after 10 p.m, along with those conditions outlined in the officer's report. Done.
Would you just cancel your microphone, please? Thank you very much for that presentation. And may I pass on our commiserations from the council for losing your husband. We can understand that it's a very difficult situation. Okay, do we have any?
Thank you, Chair. And just for the members' benefit, and I appreciate what Ms Brownlee has outlined to us today, but just to remind members that an applicant's personal circumstances are not a material consideration when considering the planning application.
Okay, have we got any questions for Miss Brownlee?
Thank you, Chair. And I think this may also be for the officer as well. I'm struggling with holiday let. I live in Woolston, love the area, but I don't think of Binley Woods as a specific holiday destination. I don't mean to be disrespectful with that. My issue is, and it is cynical and it may indeed be speculation, and I acknowledge that we should be considering the information in front of us, is this a type of accommodation, perhaps with a different name? Accommodation in that area, particularly with the amount of roadworks that are being done, and I just use this as an example, could be used as temporary accommodation, perhaps for people working in the area, and then strays into the area of what we call HMOs, houses of multiple occupation, which we are still looking at in terms of policy. I'm just nervous for the occupants of 181 and 185 that with a revolving door, if you like, in terms of who's living there, and I think you brought this forward with the very best of intentions, that there is potential for that to be misused, and I'm nervous, or I don't know how we would secure in conditions some sort of agreement in terms of how that is monitored. My point is, and again the officer may be able to assist with this, is this an HMO by any other name, and if so, how can we shape this in terms of going forward? Because I think there would be demand, rather than the sort of caravan type dwellings on the Ivor Priestfield, and I think it would be attractive. It's near the Rosy Combe as well, so it would be a very nice fit for a Monday to Friday let, if you like, away from home. And I just wonder where the difference is from HMO to actually the genuine holiday let. And again, Chair, I'm happy to hear from the applicant and or indeed the officer. Thank you.
So in my opinion, the benefit of my accommodation being close to both businesses in Coventry and in Rugby is that given COVID and the way hybrid working is at the moment, people have taken jobs in local areas that are not local to them. They live miles away, but they may come and work 2 days a week and need somewhere to stay for a night. And I have friends that already do that, and they need a nice place to come and stay that's peaceful and quiet while they are working away from home. That is more where I see this going, or where there are multiple weddings going on at Coombe Abbey, for example, and they are always fully booked, and somewhere else for someone to come and stay that's close by, that's a nice place to come and stay, that's peaceful and quiet, and that's more where I would see this being, rather than holiday let in terms of someone using it as a place to come and do what's associated with that, if that makes sense.
Okay, thanks for that. Have we got any more questions? Sam, over to you.
Yeah, just in relation to the last question, from a planning point of view, obviously we view everything under the sort of the planning remits that we have, and every application that we come in, we do take on face value. So this application has been fully assessed as a holiday let and not a house of multiple occupation. Again, I did mention in the presentation that the principle does sort of say that in the location, as you've stated, these sort of things may be acceptable. It's again just in my assessment that the size of the gardens, and it's unfortunate that the spaces would just have the potential definitely to create a significant impact, which is the main on residential amenity, which is the main reason that's being put forward.
We have a question from Councillor Fishery. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just lost for a word. If it were just an extension to the house, I mean, we have lodges. I mean, I remember, you probably do, Murray Road and all that, before it became all HMOs. People just came and lodged and went back home after a few weeks. Just by technical name, what difference does it make? Extension put on and people come in and go in as the lodgers.
Yeah, so the way I've sort of viewed that assessment, which you are correct, someone who had 2 people in the house, that would be an intensification of the dwelling per se. This one does slightly differ, that it's at the rear of the garden, and it would while in use, it would subdivide the site and it would intensify the site. You would have people in the dwelling, you would have people at the rear of the garden, and it was of the assessment of the policies we have on impacts of residential amenity that does have potential to cause a significant impact to the neighbouring properties. That's both existing and future users of those neighbouring properties.
It's been raised earlier, and looking at the report, there is no objection, and I take it Mr. Brownlee has probably spoken to the neighbour. So that eliminates that. All the various authority hasn't objected other than the parish council. So is it a precedent? This is what they're saying by title, that it's a holiday let rather than any other name. Could be, like Councillor Willis said, HMO or whatever.
Okay, I think we're almost straying into the debate here, but I'll let the officer respond to that.
Yeah, we do have a duty to look at future users. Obviously, we don't have control over when a house is sold, if people were to move in, and obviously we do have to speculate on how that would affect these future users. In this case, you are correct, there has been no objections. Myself as the officer accepts that does mean that likely the 2 people that currently occupy those dwellings do consider at this point without its use as a holiday let to be acceptable. But it's my assessment that a future user may not have that same consideration, and it would have potential to be of detriment to those 2 dwellings and their occupiers.
Councillor Bill Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. The applicant asked during the presentation whether there could be a kind of a temporary approval and a trial period to see whether it worked or not. I don't think that probably would be allowable, but I'd like to get an official opinion on it, please.
Yeah, through you, Chair. Temporary permissions is something that we as a local planning authority can issue to see if if members wanted to sort of suppose test the water in a way and see how it would actually operate and whether it would have an adverse impact on members. We do have to be mindful though that you can't just keep renewing temporary permissions. There has to be good sound reason for why we actually are doing it, because obviously our professional opinion is that there would be an adverse impact on residents or whatever. Adjacent to the property with the comings and goings from a holiday let rather than it being a traditional granny annex in that term. But it is of a gift to members of this committee that if they wanted to grant a temporary permission, you could do that. That's allowed in legislation.
We've also got a response from the officer.
I would just like to say also, with a temporary permission, that doesn't eliminate the impact on future users of the development, which would still be valid as part of the assessment.
Okay, thanks very much.
Okay, are we going to be moving into the debate now, or still a question? Councillor Slinger.
Thank you for the presentation, Sam. A question: during your presentation, you, to my mind, were saying that one of the reasons for objection was, or refusal, was the lack of similar uses in the vicinity. Can you just clarify the extent to which that factors, that weighs on your opinion?
Yeah, so that comes under a policy SDC 1 and also a reflection on the national policy section 12, which requires an assessment to be made on designs in character. So the design itself, the outbuilding already exists. It looks like an outbuilding. It's pretty well designed, I would say myself. But it is the change of use as soon as it becomes a holiday let where it becomes out of character. There's something being out of character with the area that it is situated in is a reason for refusal under that contrary nature to that policy of SDC 1.
Yeah, just thank you for that, Sam. I was just going to add as well, Sam did mention it earlier, is that and it was mentioned about getting a games room or a granny annex earlier, is that what we're dealing with here is not something that's incidental to the dwelling. It is a self-contained unit to allow holidaymakers to come and go, I assume of their own free will, on the site. So it's not a building that is, it's unfortunately no longer incidental to the dwelling house, obviously as pointed out by the applicant of why the circumstances were. So it is a slightly different setup than being an extra room on a dwelling.
Okay, I think we're going to move into the debate now. So have we got any speakers? Councillor Garcia.
Well, I'm going to crack straight into this actually, because I really cannot see what the problem is with it. The building's already there. It has had no objections. It goes within every principle of development. It says at the front that the building is a one-bedroomed holiday let for a maximum of 2 people, so it's hardly going to be party central. I really don't see that that's going to make much impact on anybody. So I am going to propose straight away that we condition this. I do agree with that, conditioning it, but sorry, Sam, but to go against your recommendation.
Chair, I'll second that.
Okay, Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I agree with Councillor Garcia. I do think it really is a nut. It does seem a bit silly. This is a relatively small dwelling. It's only going to have a maximum occupation of 2 persons. If it was a granny or granddad flat, they would come and go. They wouldn't be permanently lodged in the building. They would be incidentally allowed to move in and out of it. So I do feel that's a bit of a spurious argument. I think I personally would go for the temporary permission, perhaps for 3 years, to see whether it works and whether there are any problems, and we should condition it to the owner of that dwelling. And I think that's a good solution all the way around. We have some control over the site. We're meeting a need. One could call it rural diversification if one wished. And I think it's good use of a building which could be put to lots and lots of other uses other than a temporary, rather than a holiday let. It could be a granny flat. It could be a games room. I've seen loads of them on my patch where people have turned outbuildings into other functions and uses. And this one seems a sensible one. It could be an Airbnb. There are options that the occupier can put this outbuilding to that I don't feel are detrimental to the local community.
Thank you for that. We've got 2 other speakers. Councillor Lawrence next.
I think the business idea, I really understand by the applicant. I can really understand why they've applied for this. However, I think I'm sided with the planning officer here. The problem we have is that I know of, 20 houses along my street that have similar outbuildings. My imagination now is we've set a precedent that all of those now can start becoming residences, and we increase the population of my street by 50%. We don't bring in any more council tax. We don't bring in any more money into the environment, but we've actually significantly increased the population. So on that reason, I think I cannot, I have to go with the planning officer and say refusal here.
Are you making any proposal there?
What I'm supporting the planning officer.
Councillor Willis.
Thank you, Chair. And the benefit of Planning Committee is that we can change our minds as we progress through the evening, and I have to say, from what I've heard from yourself, from the officer, and indeed from colleagues on the committee, I am now very much moved to support an approval rather than a refusal. The words Airbnb, something that we have in Woolston, to me is far more palatable. I'm not sure where we are with proposals and seconding, whether Councillor Sanderson has just proposed, but if it is a proposal, I will second it. If it is just an indication of support, I will be supporting a move for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Happy to move for approval, Chair.
We've already got Councillor Garcia that's moved approval.
Chair, we just spoken and we'll accept the 3 years provision. Yeah.
Okay, so just to clarify, we've currently got on the table then one motion to approve the planning permission with a temporary permission for 3 years and subject to delegation to officers to draft appropriate conditions and informatives. Is that correct? We're all on board? Okay, thank you. And then we have as yet an unseconded motion from Councillor Lawrence for refusal on the basis of the officer's report.
Councillor Bill Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think the officer's written a very full report, and it seems to me that the reason for refusal mainly is that he's out of character with the area, and I agree with that, and I'll second the motion to approve. To refuse, sorry.
We've got Councillor Daly next.
Thank you, Chair. I have to say, initially, I do support what the officer's report is saying. However, similar to Councillor Willis, I think with the conditions, with the 3-year temporary permission, I think I can come around to that, and I actually think that's a good sensible idea to see how this goes. I know there was concerns from the parish council, but we haven't had a significant number of objections from neighbours. So I think I will support the condition that it is a 3-year temporary arrangement, and that did we say that it will remain linked to the current owner? Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Have we got any further speakers? In that case, we've got.
Okay, so before we move to the vote, I'm just going to clarify the recommendation so we're all clear on what we're going to vote on first. So the first motion that we're voting on is a motion to approve the planning application subject to a condition restricting it to a 3-year temporary permission, a condition linking it to the owner of property 183, and also delegation to officers to draft the remainder of the appropriate informatives and conditions. Okay.
Okay, we've got a proposer and a seconder for approval for that temporary 3-year period. All those in favour, please show. All those against, please show. That's approved then. Yeah. So that's approved for that 3-year temporary permission. Right, we're about to move on to item 2 on the applications for consideration. This is at Burton Farm, Fishery, Burton Lane, Burton Hastings.
Good evening. This is a retrospective application reference number R22/0411 at Burton Farm Fishery for a new build catering facility for an extant fishery complex. The application has been reported to the Planning Committee in accordance with the scheme of delegation, as Councillor Mayodas has requested the application be determined by the Planning Committee on the grounds of flood risk, noise and disturbance generated from the scheme, and traffic generation caused by the development. The picture shows the site location plan with the location of the catering facility shown by the red hashed box north of Heron Lake. This is an aerial photo which shows the location of the catering facility denoted by the pink X in the context of the fishery and the wider setting. The site comprises of fishing lakes, canal moorings, farmlands associated buildings, areas of hard standing, and a dwelling and a workshop. Here we have some photos of the building. Photo 1 shows the western side of the building taken from near the car park, taken towards the entrance on Burton Lane. Photo 2 shows the other side elevation, which is the eastern side, taken towards the car park area. Photo 3 is similar, but taken on the singular vehicle access track through the site. Photo 1 on this slide shows the southern elevation, showing the entrance of the building. Photo 2 shows Heron Lake and beyond. Photo 3 shows another photo of the southern elevation. Here we can see the floor plan and elevations of the building. The building has dimensions of approximately 10.8 metres in width, 14.4 metres in length, an eaves height of 2.66 metres, and a roof ridge height of 3.82. The building has been constructed out of timber boarding with a grey profile metal sheeting roof, and the windows and doors are black aluminium frames. The floor plan of the building shows that the building contains a servery, a kitchen and food prep area, toilets, and a large open space which will presumably be used for chairs and tables, and a space to facilitate the activities run by the fishery. Information was requested by the local planning authority as to the use of the building. It was confirmed that in addition to it being used as a cafe for the anglers and associated visitors, that it will also be used as a hub for the fishery, where anglers can buy their day tickets, get information, shelter. In addition, it will also be used by the angling community for events and workshops, and also will provide a facility to host charity events put on by the fishery. Going on to the key issues, the first one being the green belt. It is located in the green belt, and as defined by policy GP2, development is resisted and it's only permitted where national policy allows. Paragraph 137 of the MPPF states that the fundamental aim of the green belt is to prevent urban sprawl by keeping the land permanently open, and the essential characteristics of the green belt is its openness and permanence. Paragraph 149 of the MPPF sets out instances where the construction of new buildings is not deemed to be inappropriate. This includes the provision of appropriate facilities for outdoor sport and recreation, as long as the facilities preserve the openness of the green belt and do not conflict with the purposes including the land within it. So an assessment has to be made as to whether the catering facility is firstly an appropriate facility in connection with the use of the land as a fishery, and secondly, whether it preserves the openness of the green belt and does not conflict with the purpose of including it as a green belt designation. Firstly, it is considered that it is an appropriate facility in connection with the use of the land as a fishery. It will be used as a cafe for the anglers and other associated visitors. It provides a seating area, toilet facility and a hub for the fishery, and it will also help facilitate fishing events, competitions and events put on by the fishery. Assessing the supporting information provided by the applicants at a later stage during the application process, it's clear that the catering facility would help facilitate the activities put on by the fishery, and the approximate numbers of associated visitors suggest that the use is suitable. However, to meet the exception listed in paragraph 149 of the MPPF, the catering facility must also preserve the openness of the green belt and not conflict with the purpose of including it. The building does not preserve the openness of the green belt, The National Planning Practice Guidance states that openness is capable of having a spatial and visual dimension. Spatially, it's isolated on site, it's erected close to the middle of the site, surrounded by open land, trees and lakes. The closest permanent building is over 100 metres away. Visually, it's mostly screened by existing woodland trees, but it can be seen from a few vantage points across the site. The building, however, cannot be seen from outside the site. The building is constructed out of sympathetic materials to its rural nature. It is considered that it fails to meet the NPPF exception and therefore should be regarded as inappropriate development and should not be approved except in very special circumstances. Substantial weight should be given to any harm to the green belt, and very special circumstances will not exist unless the potential harm to the green belt and any other harm is outweighed by other considerations. Other considerations have been put forward by the applicant to outweigh the moderate harm. It's important to note first that the building does meet part of the exception in the NPPF, as it is judged to be an appropriate facility. It is sympathetically designed to be in keeping with the natural environment. It's positioned close to existing car park areas and lakes, and it's well screened by existing woodland trees and cannot be seen from outside the site. It has a minimal adverse impact on the countryside. Policy ED4 in the local plan and the NPPF supports a prosperous rural economy, including sport and recreation uses. Policy ED4 also encourages farm diversification proposals to support the viability of farms. It is considered that it is a reasonable expansion of the business and it will create employment opportunities. The uses and benefits put forward are considered to amount to very special circumstances which outweigh the harm to the greenbelt and countryside location. Moving on to other issues. In terms of character and design, it is constructed out of appropriate materials for the countryside setting. It's well screened by thousands of trees planted on site by the applicant's family, which ensures harm to the wider countryside is minimised. In terms of residential amenity, the closest unrelated property is over 300 metres away, and therefore it will not have any impact on nearby properties' residential amenities. Condition 4, however, is suggested to ensure that the kitchen equipment put in, which I know has already been installed, is acceptable and adequately prevents the emission of fumes. A condition is recommended to ensure that the building remains ancillary to the fishery business and not to be operated as a separate business or to hold other events unrelated to the fishery. The opening hours are to follow the fishery's opening hours, which changes throughout the year. In terms of highway safety and parking, the catering facility, if conditioned to remain ancillary, should not generate any more vehicle-generated visits to the site. Highway Authority have no objection subject to the building remaining ancillary, and there is sufficient parking on site. In terms of flood risk, the building has been erected on flood zone 1 land, which is land at the lowest probability of flooding. There are areas on site north of the building which are within flood zones 2 and 3, given the location of the river anchor. In terms of ecological considerations, there are records for protected and notable species nearby. Given the retrospective nature of this application, however, the Warwickshire County Council College Department are unclear whether an offence has been committed and therefore have requested that a biodiversity enhancement measures condition is put on the decision notice. In terms of vegetation, apparently, according to the information submitted, 6 trees were lost to facilitate the building, which has a minimal impact on the wider area. I have had evidence provided of replanted trees across the site to offset these trees lost, which adds to the number of trees planted by the applicant's family. In terms of the planning balance and recommendation, the catering facility is an appropriate facility in connection with the use of the fishery. Very special circumstances have been demonstrated to outweigh the harm to the greenbelt. The building has been constructed out of appropriate materials to provide a sympathetic finish to the natural and rural character of its setting. There's no visual impact from outside the site, and it will not materially affect the amenities of nearby residential properties. A condition will ensure the building remains ancillary to the fishery, and it should not generate additional vehicle flows and have an impact on highway safety and operation. The development complies with the local plan and the NPPF, and therefore the officer's recommendation is to approve subject to conditions and informatives.
Thanks to the officer. Have we got any questions? Councillor Garcia?
Yes, I have actually. So it's retrospective. Was that building put there originally for some other use, or have they always wanted that as a cafe and just didn't bother to put the permission in at the appropriate time?
It was always built with the intention to be a cafe and the associated uses I've mentioned in the report.
So why didn't they put that in then before they built it, to give us all a chance to...
It's a good question. The local planning authority were made aware before it was built that they were going to build it, and we did say to them to put an application in first, but they were having problems and delays with other applications, so they decided to build it and then get permission later.
Was the problem and delay from was it our fault that they had problems and delays?
That was a separate application, and at a time where we were stretched for resources.
So it was our fault?
In a way, but they...
Yeah. And so they put the building up and have installed kitchen equipment without any appropriate guidance then from yourselves.
I think in terms of the kitchen equipment, it's more like there's an oven. It's not a fully fledged cafe, and I know there's extraction systems in an oven, but it's not much more than that.
And you did say as well something about they were going to use it for late night parties or something, I heard at the start, for dinners or something like that?
No, the condition will ensure that it remains ancillary to the fishery, so it can't be used for parties or
because
weddings.
If the residential properties are only 300 metres away, they would hear discos and things,
yeah,
wouldn't they?
So the condition will ensure that they can't hold unrelated events to the fishery.
Right, okay, thank you.
Okay, we've got Councillor Tim. We've got the officer.
It's right now. I was just going to clarify a point. Even if there is an applicant that has experienced delays with an application, that doesn't mean that they can then go on and breach planning. I understand in this particular case, whether the applicant chooses to build, it's obviously at their own risk without proper planning permission in place. It was brought to our attention. I believe it was going to open. Was it possibly in June? And we said, obviously, you are in breach of planning. If you continue to do so, you do it at your own risk. I believe they then stopped the work that they were doing, haven't opened it, but obviously the building before us today is in breach of planning unless members obviously grant planning permission today.
Okay, before we move on to the next, because I'll make sure that people have got their microphones pointed towards where they're speaking, so because we're not hearing very well, unfortunately. So, okay. Councillor Tim Willis.
Thank you, Chair. Slight concern with us restricting timings and use of the cafe in these troubled times and sustainability. I take the point that we don't want discos disturbing people 300 metres away, but I think also in terms of seasonal business as well, I think there is a challenge to sustainability. If the worst were to happen and the business were to cease trading and the applicants perhaps looked for another use, could we potentially see this come forward as a dwelling in the future? Again, I know speculation, but concern with regard to the future of the building if we don't permit the sustainability of the business therein.
They would need permission to turn it into a dwelling. The ancillary condition is a good one to make sure that it does remain connected to the fishery business.
We've got Councillor Toby Lawrence.
I think my questions are then adding to that. I mean, there is a canal mooring nearby. What is the restriction that would stop this cafe having it get into an extended use? So the canal moorings using it, there's a military base right next door as well. Would there be restrictions on how this place was advertised and restriction that you have to be a member of the fishery or such like to be able to use the cafe?
I think the only way of enforcing it is through our condition. I don't think we could put that they can't advertise it. I think that would fall out of the remit of planning, to be honest.
Maybe a question whether we can raise some informative on that basis. I don't know how that would be worded, but something on that condition. I don't think we want to see advertising of a cafe on that road or on the moorings to encourage people to use this outside of the use of the fisheries. And then there's a question about if they are going to have to use this cafe for late night use, it has to be licensed because they're offering hot drinks. So there is some consideration about licensing on this as well.
Yeah, just through you, Chair. Obviously, as Council Arts is aware, licensing obviously is covered by our Environmental Health Department, so that would be separate legislation that they'd have to adhere to. In terms of, there was concern about the actual sort of, I suppose, the future use and who it's actually being advertised to. And there's obviously a condition that's been proposed about remaining ancillary to Burton Farm Fishery. Obviously, it would be quite hard to monitor who's coming and going from that. I think we can potentially strengthen that condition if it's actually, you know, to say it's linked to, you know, I suppose the people actually members of the actual fishery who are actually there. Obviously, I'm conscious of where it is and how we'd actually monitor that. But I suppose if it came to our attention that, you know, it was being advertised as a free-for-all event, a place to actually rent out or anything like that, then obviously we would have that condition to then fall back on. So I think if members were minded to go with the recommendation, we could look at strengthening that condition to try and address some of those concerns about it being used by the wider community if members were happy to go with it, but they wanted it restricted to members of the actual fishing club.
Absolutely, I think it's something on that lines, and it is about the moorings as well. I think what we could see is the extended use of the moorings, because now they have a facility supporting them. That's including toilet facilities as well as cooking and everything else like that. So I think there's some way of strengthening that definition of planning is absolutely what I'd be looking for.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. The other point I was going to make was there was a comment, I think, by Councillor Willis about it potentially becoming a dwelling at a later date. Obviously, all that we can do is look at the case applications before us. If that did happen, because obviously there's many businesses and outbuildings in the rural community, we'd have to assess that on a case-by-case basis.
We've got Councillor Sanderson next. What list, actually?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I've got some concerns about ancillary uses, particularly retail ancillary uses. I can accept that whilst it's being used during the fishing season, selling rods, tackle, bait and other equipment related to fishing would be acceptable. However, out of season, if it was used for other ancillary retail purposes, then I think we might have a problem. The other point was on, if you can put the picture of the building back up again, please. Yeah, as you can see from the picture, even within a woodland type setting, it's still quite a large and strong structure. Does condition 5 cover us for landscape planting to soften the impact of the building within the vicinity?
Originally we were going to put a condition on for landscaping, but it was considered unreasonable to attach that given the evidence they provided, because they planted new trees just the other side by the lake, and that was considered.
Could I suggest to the officers, somebody who knows a little bit about habitat, not all animals or birds live in trees. They have a preference for hedgerows, ferns and grasslands.
I mean, in the condition
it would
5,
help to have soften that landscape
Yeah.
with some immediate planting around the building and into the wider area.
Yes, condition 5 does cover that, exactly what you've said.
It's soft landscaping and they will now be covered.
That can be included, yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, for you, Chair, the wording's there. It says including mixed native species planting, and then details obviously to be submitted for things like amphibians and reptiles and bird and backed boxes as well. So it specifically does mention additional planting. I don't know if you can see the photographs or the image there below the photographs. You can see either side of the building. There's quite a lot of landscaping that I think the case officers referred to that's gone in by the applicants already. So this, I suppose, yes, this close-up photo shows it quite stark, but I think the surrounding context is quite green and landscaped. But Condition 5 does make sure that we get additional planting for protected species and other animals that may be in the vicinity.
Well, we've got Councillor Daly next.
Thanks, Chair. Apologise for my voice, I'm full of cold this evening. I did have a question about Condition 3, but I think Richard has generally answered my question. I think personally, I wouldn't have as much concern about this proposal if it was a kitchenette for members of the angling club to use. I could probably come on board with that, you know, somewhere to make a cup of tea before going out on the water and coming back in. However, the talk about traditional cafe-style meals such as breakfast sandwiches, burgers and fries, I'm not quite sure how that kind of service isn't going to add to the number of visitors that are going to be turning up here. I'm thinking on a busy Saturday morning that seems different to a kitchenette maybe style kind of building that would just be there as an ancillary building to support what's already on offer. I think I would be happy to support or to propose supporting this application if there was the condition that stated it was for members' use only. So I don't know if that's been proposed formally yet. I would be willing to propose that it gets accepted with the condition that it's only for members' use. Is that possible? Thank you.
I just add something there. Not that I disagree with you, but that's very difficult for somebody to police. And also, actually, if they're going to have a business, okay, if you're going to allow a catering business in the Greenbelt like that, you're almost setting it up for failure, aren't you? If you're saying that it's only members of the angling club and not the people that are mooring their boats or not the people that are walking through that can use it. So my question would be, how can you police it? And B, you're setting that, if you're minded to allow it, you're setting them up for a failure, really, aren't you?
I think we've got that point, but there is a queue of people wanting to speak, so just jump the queue, sorry. Yeah, we've got...
Through you, Chair, just to clarify something for Councillor Garcia, the application is specifically for a catering facility for the fishery complex, not for a general new business. So that's what the applicants are specifically going in for.
They have a temporary trailer on site. That's used, those people listed in the off support, they use that trailer. That's not referring to this catering building.
Okay, we've got Councillor Moudis.
Thank you, Chair. My concern would be the opening hours. It says in the report that summertime trading is till 9 p.m. If there were charity events on, would they also be limited to those same restricted opening hours? And could we somehow involve that? Noise travels particularly well in villages, and I know the site, so it would be a concern for me. Thank you.
Yeah, as I've looking through the conditions, there isn't a specific condition focusing on opening hours. I don't know if this is a facility that would then be open for like night fishing or anything like that. But if members were concerned about opening hours, then yes, that could be something that we could look at and actually restricting. I think again it operates, case officer correct me if I'm wrong or not, but does have I think opening hours at the moment but it does vary between winter and summer. But again, we can align that with other decisions, I believe, potentially on the site. Obviously, I guess whether it's sort of like daylight hours, potentially type of thing in the winter, in the summer where it's open to like 9 o'clock. But obviously in winter, you would members wishing to have it closed earlier, then we can obviously look at that to make sure that's aligned.
Thank you.
Councillor Mystery.
Just a couple of points on advertising. If you put a board up and say facility, and then you'd write down cafe and toilets, whatever. So people actually will say, yeah, I'm members or whatever, and I want to be a member. Can't stop anybody doing that. And to pick up Mrs. Garcia's point about advertising, you can restrict it, but you can't stop people on Facebook saying, what a fantastic facility it is. Please go and visit. Yeah? And it gets tagged. And it becomes a public thing anyway. So it doesn't gel up. I'm not a very savvy with technology, but today I get tagged into all sorts of things that I don't want to. But sometimes it catches your eye, depend. And you say, yeah, okay. So it's not, you don't want to put condition on advertising, It can do through networking.
Thanks for that. Councillor Slinger.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask the planning officers, thanks for the presentation, by the way, can I ask how unprecedented is it for a retrospective planning application to be submitted for a matter like this in the context of neighbouring residents finding that a building had been erected without planning permission and might be quite concerned and very concerned about that?
Yes, I mean, again, through you, Chair, the planning legislation doesn't prevent someone from building something and then applying for planning permission at a later date. We have to consider it with the same weight we'd give it with the building actually not being there. Obviously, anyone that does that at their own risk, but we can't to somehow taint our decision on the basis that the building is already there. So, yeah, the legislation and the processes that we work to allow us to consider retrospective applications. There can be all right of reasons why these applications come to us. Some people, are genuine mistakes. Unfortunately, there are others that may, to be blunt, play the system. But we just have to consider these applications in accordance with the development plan and the policies that we have.
Chair, may I come back on that? But is this, an unusual case for a change of use or a facility which goes beyond what was already there to be done in a retrospective manner?
I mean, I think probably a complete new building, to be fair, is quite unusual of that scale, to be brutally honest. What you tend to find is that you may have an existing building like that may then evolve. So perhaps it may have started off as a storage unit, and then it morphed into them selling fishing rods and items like that, and then it morphed again into having hot drinks and things like that. So that's what you tend to find happens more, and then it gets brought to our attention because there's then perhaps been a bit of material change of use, rather than someone to some extent, I suppose, investing quite a lot of money in a brand new building and erecting it that way. It tends to be more gradual, from my experience, with these types of outdoor recreational facilities.
We've got Councillor Willis next.
Thank you, Chair. I'm nervous that if we're not careful, we could inadvertently push ourselves into a corner and end up with a refusal. We're hearing arguments with regard to if you like, the opening hours of the business. Councillor Daly has outlined, or not outlined, has proposed we go with something that is membership only. A colleague, Councillor Mrs. Garcia, has come back and again and pointed out the downside, if you like, of doing that. Councillor Istry has pointed out the word on the street, or indeed on Facebook, and the popularity. There have been some intelligent comments made with regard to this, but I think to a certain extent we need to appeal, or trust, I think is the word we should use, the opinions of the officer. And I think Richard has offered perhaps a way forward for us in terms of conditioning and what we can do with this and how we can manage this. I think we just need to be careful as we go forward. Otherwise, we could end up with a proposal that actually we don't support, and the other option will be you asking all those for, against, and it is refused. Please, can we tread carefully as we progress? An appeal, if you like. Or rather, let's not have an appeal.
Have we got any further questions, or are we going to go straight into the debate? Councillor Daly, another question.
Yeah, this is a question for the officers. Can I just have some clarity on the phrase in condition 3 that says, at no point shall be rented out or sold on and used for any purpose other than that associated with the existing business operations at Burton Farm Fishery. In your opinion, do you believe that existing business operations at Burton Farm Fishery include selling breakfasts, burgers and hot dogs? Because that's what the report talks about them intending to do. Is that correct? Yet the condition at the end talks, it's very clear that it says that it will only be used for purposes associated with the existing business operations at Burton Farm Fishery.
I think the uses come into question in terms of this building. Yes, it will be akin to a cafe, but that's not the primary or the only use of the building. It will be used to help facilitate events put on by the fishery, which is why it says existing business operations. It will also be used as a hub for the fishery, where they can go and shelter or buy tickets. It's not just going to be where you go and sit down and have a breakfast. That's not the only use of the building.
Thing, if
just
tagging on to that one quickly.
We've got a list of speakers, and we're going to move around the list, so it keeps it all fair. Otherwise, people are speaking 2 or 3 times, and others don't get a chance. So we've got Councillor Bill Lewis next.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Yeah, that's a slightly facetious remark, really. None of us like retrospective applications, and you particularly have expressed that opinion in the past. But at least you can see what's being proposed, so you can judge it, rather than having to imagine what it's going to be like.
Councillor Garcia, don't forget to speak into the microphone. Actually, into the microphone.
Just going to go back to my previous point when I said about parties. You've just said they're proposing to have charity nights. How do you know they're not going to do those till midnight and have dances and all sorts?
But that's not a related activity put on by a fishery. Is a party. I mean, the charity events.
Well, a charity night could be
charity,
a disco, couldn't it?
They help disabled people come and have a fishing day, or they have a model boat club who come and use the waters. It's things like that, really, rather than parties.
Right.
That wouldn't be a related fishing event.
Right. But that wouldn't be at night either, then, would it?
So I'm also conscious that I know that was obviously a concern raised by Councillor Malders as well. So again, this can be something we can look at with regard to the actual hours of operation of the actual building, if that was a concern of members. I think.
Well, it's a concern of mine because to me, the officer did say charity nights. Well, to me, a charity night isn't a disabled fishing contest. A charity night is a function where everyone has a good time and there's drink and music and everything else. That's what I'm querying, really.
Okay, so the problem is, Councillor Sanders, another question.
Yeah, it's the definition of a party or a business meeting is wide open to interpretation. Clearly, if it was a party, would it not require a licence of some kind?
I believe there is a licensing process which they will have to undertake separate to the planning process. Yeah.
So this is the problem, isn't it, for councillors when we've got somebody that builds something and asks for permission retrospectively. Our hands are almost tied behind our back because the building is there now, isn't it? And I know Councillor Slinger, put a motion to council about gypsies and travellers. Well, every one of the gypsy and traveller sites up north were all done and permissions asked for retrospectively, every one of them. So this is the problem we have. So here we are. Let's get into the debate now and let's have some proposals put forward. We've got a proposal from Councillor Daly with conditions. And does he want to amend that? Does he want to speak?
Yeah, because I am now slightly concerned about a proposal that puts such a strict condition on members only that actually a daytime charity event or an event for any particular group of people put on by the fishery. I would hate to completely, make that impossible to do if it was such a strict members only condition. So I don't really know where that leaves us or me with this, and I'm probably interested to hear the views of everyone else on this committee, actually, with regard to that.
Right, we're moving into the debate, and it's Councillor Mystery.
Thank you, Chair. Gosh, I'm here. The thing is, if somebody is disabled, somebody got young children, family, a fisherman, he will bring his family, yeah? And if it's an event, it's a championship, you will see those connection with the people. So I think the facility in the cafe will accommodate people who are not participating, yeah? And if somebody comes disabled, he come with a whatever. So I think I'm going to move as printed, yeah? Because I think we're getting into jargons and restriction which are not there, the fear of it, yeah? So thank you.
What we could possibly do is strengthen condition 3 so that we can enforce it through officer's recommendation to strengthen it all up. And if that is the case, I don't mind seconding Councillor Daly's proposal.
Well, what about Councillor Mysteries? Was that the same one?
You're referring to 3. The proposed building hereby approved shall remain, and 3 to Burton Fishery, and no point shall be rented out or sold on or used by purpose other than that associated with the existing business operation at Burton Farm Fishery. Is that already a condition anyway?
So through you, Chair, we currently have a proposal on the table from Councillor Daly, which is to approve with an amendment to condition 3, which what I understand from the debate we've had is to strengthen its association with members without being unduly restrictive to address the concerns about people associated with members who might like to partake of the facilities. Is that correct, Councillor Daly?
That is correct, thank you.
And did you have any views on opening hours conditions raised by Councillor Maldis as part of your proposal?
Yes, I think I would agree with Councillor Maldis's views on the opening hours and the restrictions on opening hours.
So what we have on the table currently is a proposal for approval subject to amendment to condition 3 to tie it more closely to the membership without being unduly restrictive, and a condition around opening hours with delegation to officers to draft or amend those conditions, which is currently unseconded.
Okay, well, I haven't got a problem with seconding that from the Chair.
Can I have a clarification on the opening hours? What exactly are you talking about? It should have been written down clearly in the first place.
So there's currently no condition relating to opening hours at the moment. Our understanding from the debate is that members would perhaps like a more definitive condition around opening hours, which may be variable over summer and winter. That is my understanding.
Chair, I move that it be as printed for approval.
We've got Councillor Garcia next, followed by Councillor Willis.
Would those hours be the same as any other licensed premises in the area?
I mean, that would obviously be down to the licensing authority to decide whether or not.
Well, why are we talking about the hours
restrict with regard to licensing. So with regard to the hours, I mean, we would tie. I think there was again, you and correct me if I'm wrong. There's already an hours condition relating to the site, or they operate in the details they've submitted.
When I first wrote this report, I didn't think it was necessary to have an hours condition because I thought the ancillary condition covers that, because you can't have it open and being used for unrelated events, because then it won't be ancillary.
But anything could be a related event, I'm going to have a charity event to raise money for my angling club, or whatever you call it. That's related, isn't it?
Yeah, I understand the concern there, because what you're saying is that then, in order to raise funds...
I'm going to raise funds for this child here whose father's a member at night because whatever.
So again, I don't know if members of a particular steer, I know 9 o'clock at night was mentioned earlier on. But
equally, I don't want to put anybody out of business, because I know firsthand how difficult it is. But I want to make sure it's a level playing field, and I don't
suddenly see why they should have longer licensing hours than any other licensed premises or any other business premises in the area.
I think obviously we need to look at what the case is before us, and I think that there obviously is concern. There are, although several hundred metres away, there are residential properties nearby, or the moorings.
300 metres
300
away,
metres.
but like Councillor Maudis said, in the countryside, that noise
can carry. Exactly.
carries.
No, I know. I'm agreeing with you here on the basis that you know, particularly if you've got amplified music, that can carry some distance. And what we don't want to do is put ourselves in a position whereby then it's a headache for our environmental health people to monitor. So I think that what we need to do is to make sure that it mirrors any other restrictions on the site, and we need to obviously, as officers, look at those hours restrictions and impose them, so that they are in line with other operations on the actual fishery complex at the moment. And I think that condition 3 can bolster that to make that clear, because I think what we don't want is, the concern seems to be is like, late at night, at 10 o'clock at night on a winter's evening, that there's, the place is open, and that is causing concern. Obviously that condition, it can be worded in a way that the details can always be approved or amended at a later date if there's concern that the business may that may be an undue burden on the business. The condition can always come back and always vary that if it's proven that the principle's okay and the hours that we perhaps put on is, then transpires it's too harsh, we can always come back and change that. But what we can't, if we haven't got that condition, obviously relating to hours, then obviously it's difficult to then go back retrospectively. It becomes more of an environmental health matter. So, again, if it's delegated to officers, we can have a look back through the specifics about what is, if there are any restrictions on opening hours. If there specifically isn't, because it's solely to do with ancillary, we can obviously then draft some which we think are reasonable and are similar to perhaps other businesses in the area. I mean, I'm guessing that we're talking, 9 o'clock at night was mentioned, obviously summertime. Obviously I'm aware that there's other businesses in the locality that do serve, if it's public houses and things like that, they may run till say 10 or 11 o'clock at night, but obviously this is slightly different. I accept this is a cafe.
Okay, now, don't forget the basics. Indicate to me you want to speak, and then when I say speak, then you can put your microphone on. So we've now got Councillor Maudis.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to clarify that the 9 o'clock was in the report. It wasn't anything that I hadn't plucked to figure out out of the air. Thank you.
Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. I really do think we ought to leave this to the delegated responsibility of the office to sort out the hours. If it's a fishing event, it could start 6 o'clock in the morning. You've got to be realistic about how this sport operates. There are other venues where there are facilities on the site for anglers, and I would suggest you have a look at some of those. I think Stony Cove's one that comes immediately to mind. So again, have a look at what's happening out there elsewhere, and let's make sure how that we condition it where we can condition it, because all conditions should be defendable. And if it requires them to get a licence, we point them in towards our regulatory committee.
Councillor Willis has been waiting along.
Thank you, Chair. I think what has just been mentioned or suggested by Councillor Sanders is very much the way we're going. I think the two proposals we have on the table are not going to get the support or indeed may head us down the path of refusal. Can we just therefore be clear, and apologies, Chair, I raised this when we were at questions rather than debate, look to the officers for the guidance. Let's have the proposal, let's tweak the proposal and agree on it. And it seems that Richard has given us the way forward in terms of that. I think Councillor Sanderson may even have proposed it. If it is a proposal, I'm happy to second. If it's bolted on somewhere else and somebody else has seconded it, I'm happy to support it. But can we just be very clear what it is we've agreed on and what we're requesting officers to do to ensure that we can take this forward?
Okay,
Thank you,
going
Chair.
over to Sarah to tell us.
Okay, so what we have on the table is still a proposal from Councillor Adam Daly to approve with amendments to Condition 3 to ensure that it's tied to the membership of the fishery but without being unduly restrictive, noting the concerns of members that have been raised during the debate, and for the addition of a condition in relation to opening hours to again address the concerns of members around late night events, noise travel, etc. in the vicinity of that, and that has been seconded by Councillor Gillias. And then we have currently also a proposal from Councillor Mystery to move as printed with no amendments, but that is not currently seconded.
Okay, so we've got a proposal and a second. Do you think we ought to move to the vote? Let's move to the vote. All those in favour? With all the amendments and the conditions firmed up. Please show.
I'm not sure what I'm voting for.
Yeah, you've got 10.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is it okay? Right, we've got Richard next, and this is land north of Zone C, land north of Coventry Road, Thurleston. And that's the creation of a watercourse and associated landscaping.
Okay, thank you, Chair. This application is being reported to committee as it is a major application that extends slightly beyond the northern boundary of the original outline application site, which was for employment use at land to the north of the Tritax site, north of Coventry Road, Thurleston. The application is for the creation of a watercourse with associated landscaping, which will enable a diversion of an existing watercourse that crosses Zone C, part of the Tritax employment site. The aerial photo in front of you here now shows you where the existing watercourse is, along here, and the blue line here shows the proposed location of the watercourse. So further details here show that there's a faint blue line running along here, which shows the line of the existing watercourse, and along here is then a tree-lined and with hedgerows route of the new watercourse, with the sections shown above. At the widest point, the current application boundary will extend 11.5 metres further north. The part of the site is located in the southwest area of Rugby, allocated by policy DS8. The principle of the proposed development is therefore considered acceptable with the relevant policies. As mentioned, the key issues were the principle of development, but also drainage, visual amenity and landscaping, and protected species and biodiversity. As mentioned just then, the principle of development on a Tritax site has also been previously established by local plan policies and the Outline Planning Permission. The proposed watercourse will allow then a development of Zone C, which are the two sort of employment units to the south of the site, which are part of a separate application that is currently pending. These proposals will then enable the delivery of the employment site in accordance with those relevant policies. The lead local flood authority has requested, in connection with drainage, that additional information is provided regarding the watercourse, future risk and future maintenance. This information was then provided and then raised no objection, subject to conditions and informatives. The watercourse itself will be positioned in a ditch at a lower level than the surrounding land. This will therefore not be viewed from outside the immediate area. The proposals will, though, involve the removal of one Category B ash tree and around 22 metres of existing native hedgerow that cross the site. However, landscaping is proposed either side of the new watercourse. This will include 26 new trees, a mix of maple, alder and Scots pine, together with native hedgerows totalling 600 metres in length. The Council's Tree and Landscape Officer has been studying these plans carefully and has raised no objection to the proposed landscaping, subject to conditions that relate to tree protection measures, the implementation of the landscaping scheme as well. It is therefore considered that the general design of the proposals and the impact on the character of the area is acceptable. There is reference into the report that Dunchurch Parish Council have referred to removal of a protected Category A oak tree. That is not part of this application site and will be assessed in relation to a Reserve Matters application for Zone C. In terms of protected species and biodiversity, the county ecologist has requested that a biodiversity impact assessment was submitted as part of the application. This will then provide and show the current application and would increase the increase of biodiversity units by 0.98 in the area and an increase of biodiversity units in relation to hedgerows by just over 4 units. The submitted landscaping and ecology management plan includes sufficient precautions to ensure that impacts on protected species are avoided, the impact on them is avoided. So therefore, again, subject to conditions, it is considered that the impact on those is acceptable. In addition, the proposed watercourse and landscaping will form part of the connection to the strategic green infrastructure network along the landscaped areas and strategic landscaping to the western part of the actual development site. Other issues relate to obviously heritage, archaeology, neighbouring properties and noise and vibration. Just for members' interest, the closest residential properties to this watercourse area will be about 125 metres, and it's not considered that either the watercourse or landscaping would have an impact on them. Overall, the planning balance is that the proposal will support the delivery of the allocated employment site, which will provide economic benefits and employment during construction and operation. It will provide suitable drainage for the site and be of an acceptable design and scale. It's not due to have an adverse impact on biodiversity, and it will provide additional landscaping. These are factors that weigh in favour of the proposals, and therefore the proposals are judged to consider to comply with the development plan, and there are no material considerations that have been identified to indicate that the proposal should otherwise be not approved. Therefore, the recommendation is for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, Councillor Lawrence.
Probably just a question for my clarification on this. The movement of this drainage ditch, is that because there was an issue in the understanding of what was about to be built, or is it what I would call planning by stealth, because what you're doing is actually enabling a future planning development to come into place?
Okay, yes, through you, Chair. Obviously, the employment outline has already been granted with regard to the scale of that employment. The reason this application has actually been submitted is that more detailed specifications have now come forward with regard to the road network to the south, which will also include, I understand, footways, cycleways and bus stops, and basically more space is actually required, which has meant that the development itself has had to shift slightly further north. However, although this application site is outside the outline application, it's still within the overall allocation that's part of the local plan.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Any further questions? Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. Regarding the new watercourse, will it have a settling in period so that it can become biodiverse? If one just puts in a new ditch and says, hope for the best that the wildlife will move there, then it may actually fail. And who's going to oversee the redirection of this watercourse so that it will effectively help the wildlife?
I mean, I think obviously proposals are before us are to obviously divert it. I believe the control of all of that will still be with the wider applicant, Tritax, so they will actually have the responsibility for the site. I believe it will still be within their own ownership, and they will then also maintain it. There are conditions on with regard to surrounding surface water maintenance plans, which cover the whole site, not just this site, but the whole outline site before. But we've also, obviously, there's reference to that in condition 6 as well. So it's also, there's quite a lot of detail there about actually having named parties responsible, including contact names, email addresses and phone numbers. So if the surface water element is not working, there's actually direct contact. And it's also about how it will be managed and maintained for that lifetime then of the development. So I think condition 6 is consistent with other conditions that have been imposed for that employment site. So I think because it's been imposed on this particular one, there is an element of control. I know that obviously the lead flood authority is content with this condition to be imposed, and obviously then there's also obviously the landscaping one that goes with that as well. But I think your question was more about the water.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. I mean, my concern was that we will be creating a sterile ditch and hoping the wildlife and use it as a habitat, and then closing down the old one, which is currently a wildlife habitat.
I mean, it's obviously a difficult one because I mean you have to obviously have an element of trust that they will, maintain this and move through it properly in the construction process. Obviously, if there's any protected species, they're covered by separate legislation. But I would hope that as this will then connect to the existing ditch further up to the north west of the site, then it hopefully won't then result in just a stagnant ditch. It will actually be part of a wider blue infrastructure as well as green infrastructure route and connect through, as I mentioned earlier. So I guess if there are particular problems that come about it, then we've got the ability to go back with the conditions that we've got to, look if there are difficulties with it and how it's operating. But you would hope that with the landscaping and all
I never like to leave things to hope. Yeah. Would an informative help towards the applicant?
Yes, I mean, we could put on additional form to can just for clarity. I mean, obviously, I appreciate it depends what other members say, but we can always come back to that about exactly what wording you would like for that.
Right, thank you.
Have we got any further questions, or can we go into debate? Just on a point, those who remember the long hot summer of 1976, a lot of the farmers used to dig out balancing ponds so they could use the water to irrigate the crops. And one of those to the rear of my house. And if you go down there now, you'll never believe the amount of wildlife that exists. Wildlife will get wherever there's water. Wherever there's a habitat, they'll get there and live there. Any questions? Any further questions or into debate? Any proposers? Councillor Garcia.
I propose that it's moved as per the officer's recommendation with Councillor Sanderson's informative on it.
Councillor Toby Lawrence.
Yes, I would second that.
Can I just clarify the clarification on the actual informative that's being motioned? If that's okay, Councillor Sanderson.
Yeah, very much. It's about encouraging the applicant to make every effort to encourage biodiversity within the new habitat.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson.
Okay with that? Is everybody happy now? He loves them, yeah. And knows them all by name. Right, let's move to the vote. All those in favour, please show. Those against? Well, that's approved. We've got you. Right, we're going to move straight on now to item 4, which is land north of Zone C, and that's straight over to Sarah.
Slide.
Thank you, Chair. So for the benefit of members, this is a technical amendment to an existing planning permission, that's, well, an existing resolution to grant planning in relation to Coton Park. So members may recall, for those of you who are here, that in January 2022, you resolved to grant planning application R200787. It's the Coton Park 475 dwellings, primary school, land for secondary school, etc. Subject to conditions and informative set out in the planning report, and also the completion of a Section 106 agreement. Now, in that resolution to grant, one of the conditions, condition 2, relates to the submission of reserve matters. Now, ordinarily, our conditions relate to all reserve matters being submitted within 3 years, and that is usually long enough for most applications. However, on large-scale applications, we often find that developers need a longer period of time in which to submit reserve matters. So it can be 5, it can be 7 years, depending on the scale of the development. The condition that was added onto the planning permission is that the first application for approval for reserve matters be made within 3 years, and it was silent as to any other reserve matters approvals being submitted. Now, because there is no long stop date in there for the other reserve matters approvals, legislation kicks in and puts a deemed 3 years in. So effectively, we've got all reserve matters being needed to be submitted in 3 years, which was not the original intention of the condition. So what we are asking is for members to approve the amendment shown in blue on the screen, which is to put a long stop date in for the other reserve matters of 7 years for this particular development, to enable the developer to have enough time to submit the various reserve matters and build out in an appropriate time frame. That is it.
Councillor Tim Willis.
Thank you, Chair. Happy to move approval.
Councillor Bill Lewis next.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, can I just ask a question? Is it possible that making this alteration will mean that the building of the school could be even later than is thought at the moment?
It wouldn't have any impact on any of the current plans or any of the other conditions. So I don't have any answer in relation to the timeframe, but from my understanding and memory of the matter, and Richard may be able to help me here, the school was dealt with separately anyway, and all the Section 106 agreement where it actually was dealt with was going to do was extend the period of time for which land was safeguarded, and this doesn't have any impact on that.
I have some concerns because I was involved back in 2014 about getting a school built up in Coton Park, and there have been delays after delays by the county council on getting it done.
I appreciate those concerns. This doesn't go to that at all, and we're not revisiting the principle or any other aspect of the application. It's purely the wording of this one condition.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Garcia next.
Microphone.
I'd like to second the proposal. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks. We've got Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Mr. Former Mayor, isn't it? Thank you, Chairman. Can I fully support this amendment to the original application that we had before us? It was 3 years was a ridiculous time frame in which to set it in the first place, and we said that on numerous occasions, right back to the hearing in public of the local plan in 2018. Councillor Lewis has mentioned it was also raised in 2014. What the county council is doing is beyond me. Even if this was to go to housing in the future, there would still be a demand, a need.
Councillor, we're talking about the amendment to this condition, and that's all. That's it. That's just this amendment. We're not talking about anything else other than that.
Okay, well, I fully support the amendment because it allows more sensible things to be done in the near future, I hope.
and so say all of us. Yeah. We've got Councillor Lawrence next. Sorry, I beg your pardon, it was Councillor Mystery next. Sorry, yes. I've got to go to Specsavers, I'm sorry.
Chair, just what Sarah just said, because it says a secondary school provision or residential. So if listening to the other members, within the 7 years, it gets forgotten sometime, yeah? And we've seen it what happened in Coston about the medical centre, and they say, well, it's gone by the time and now nobody wants it, not suitable, and build houses on it, yeah? So what I'm questioning is, that in that 7 years, if the county delay, does it mean defaults to the developer says, sorry, we're going to just build the houses, we come back?
So just to be clear, this condition doesn't relate to the secondary school or have any impact on the provisions around the secondary school. They are dealt with in the Section 106 agreement, and the safeguarding period in relation to the secondary school Act has not changed and does not change by altering this condition. This is purely to overcome a technical amendment where it was an oversight because the legislation is kicking in and doing something that wasn't intended by the original condition. This has nothing to do with the secondary school.
I think that was made absolutely clear in the presentation. So we've got Councillor Lawrence next.
I just wanted my voice, my objection to the fact that other things have come into case, and I definitely would move that we now go to a vote on this.
Excellent. Right. Let's move to a vote. All those in favour, please show. That looks like unanimous to me. Thanks to Sarah. Right, we'll move on then to item 5 on the agenda, advance notice of site visits.
No further to add, Chair.
And then item 6, delegated decisions.
Just a no.
Okay. And that concludes the meeting for tonight. Thank you all for attending.